Welcome to the Dare to Multiply podcast. On this podcast, we help passionate Jesus followers become courageous, obedient disciples who impact their communities for the kingdom of God. I'm your host, Cynthia Anderson, a disciple multiplication coach and trainer. I'm going to show you how to make and multiply disciples in your area. God's got great things ahead for you. Let's dare to multiply. When do I share the gospel? Do I share immediately when I meet somebody, or do I build a relationship first? And if I'm building a relationship, how long do I wait before I get around to sharing the good news of Jesus? This is what we're going to be talking about today on this episode. So I hope it's going to be really helpful to you. This is a question lots of people have asked, and I know there's some great answers there as we look to the Lord and to Scripture on this. All right, I'll be right back with that in just a moment. Are you busy but not seeing the fruit you long for? Dissatisfied with your present level of impact on those around you? Or frustrated with traditional methods of discipleship that don't seem to be effective? If so, the Getting Started in Disciple Making Movements course may be just what you need. Inside the Getting Started program, you'll get access to a step-by-step proven approach to making and multiplying disciples. Not only will you receive 25 short and practical video teachings spread out over 6 modules, but you'll have a chance to connect with others for group coaching via our monthly Zoom calls. And even more importantly, you'll become part of a global community of like-minded people from all over the world who are passionately committed to following Jesus and impacting others around them. If you want to get unstuck and begin moving forward as a disciple who makes disciples, I encourage you to go to courses.dmmsfrontiermissions.com and sign up for this powerful program today. And now to today's episode. Okay, so here we are. We are talking today about when do we share the gospel, the good news of Jesus, with people that are new relationships to us, new contacts that we're building in a community. When do we begin to share the gospel with them? It's a really important question, and I want to be upfront and say there's no simple answer, there's no formula to this. But there are some key principles that I think a lot of people get confused about and make errors in this area that actually hinder rapid multiplication in your area. And so I want to address this, but I want to address it with a cautionary word that there is nuance here. There is some differences depending on the context and culture. So take whatever I say today in prayer before the Lord and do whatever the Lord's leading you to do. Really, please don't feel like I'm giving you formulas on this, but I do think there are some principles. There's some areas where I've made some what I would now call mistakes in this area, and times when I've pushed too fast and times when I've gone too slow. So we want to talk about this. When do you begin to share the gospel with people that you are trying to reach out to in a new community, or maybe you just moved into a new neighborhood and you're wanting to be light and salt there? How quickly do you begin to share your testimony or share the gospel with people in order to reach them? Or maybe you're working as a missionary in an area that is unreached and you've just moved there. How quickly do you start to share? These are really key questions. And I want to first of all go to the example of Jesus. And I think in everything we do with disciple multiplication, disciple making movements, we always have to look to Jesus as our example. What did Jesus do? How did he handle this question? It was a question he faced. He went into new villages and new areas. He also sent his disciples into new areas to proclaim the kingdom of God. And there was an approach and there was a way that Jesus worked that gives us a model that we can learn from. And I always want to go back to the Jesus model, right? There are lots of different ideas out there about this, but I know that if I will do everything I can to be like Jesus and to do things the way he did them, I will see much fruit in my work. And so when I look at Jesus, and I would encourage you to go ahead and study Jesus in relation to this question, what did he do? Did Jesus immediately begin to share with people? How much did he share with new people? One thing that I noticed when I began to search the scriptures and look at the gospels and see Jesus's life was I noticed that Jesus never spent 3 months or 6 months or 2 years just building relationships with people before he began to talk about the things of the kingdom. Not once do you see that in Jesus, not once do you see that in the Apostle Paul. So that's a pretty good indicator to us that we shouldn't take a long time before we begin to introduce spiritual conversations with those that we are sent to, those that we want to reach. Now, I want to be sure to make it clear that I'm not saying that we are only in people's lives to convert them to Christianity or to try to get them to become like us, or we need to just love people for the sake of loving people, right? If you have neighbors and you begin a spiritual conversation and they reject that and they don't want to talk about that, it's not like we stop having conversations with them at all, right? They're our neighbors, they are our family, they are our friends, they are people in our lives. So we just need to love people, right? And that's something that God commanded us to do. He commanded us to love God and love others. And that means selfless, loving, compassionate relationships with people where we are in their lives, not with an agenda, not with a purpose. Okay, so having said that, we are also sent and commanded by Jesus to go and make disciples. And that means that as we go to make disciples, we go with a message, not an agenda, but a message that has transformed and changed our lives and that we deeply believe will change other people's lives for the good, right? It truly is good news that we carry. And yet sometimes we are so hesitant to enter into these conversations for fear of rejection that we are very unlike Jesus in this way. When we look at Jesus, we see that he would ask people questions, he would initiate conversation, and fairly quickly he would lead them to spiritual matters, right? He would talk about the kingdom. He would tell a parable or a story to them and then, say, he who has ears to hear, let him hear. He wouldn't always explain what he was saying, but he would talk about things that prompted spiritual conversation and spiritual thinking in everything he did, in every relationship. He quickly got to spiritual matters. And so we need to also learn how to do this and not fear pushing people away. Because what we then do is we attract people who are interested in relationship with us. They may be lonely. They may want to know us because we have something else to offer them. When I was working in Nepal and India and times when I've been in Africa, I'm pretty sure that people just want to know me because I could potentially give them a way to get to America, right? So people have different kinds of motives, but you want to uncover those motives and discover quickly who are the people who are genuinely spiritually open and spiritually interested. There's a big difference between someone being relationally open and being spiritually open, right? And we want to discover who is spiritually open, who is spiritually seeking. And you cannot tell this just by looking at people, right? You have to open the conversation in some kind of way. Now, sometimes people will open the conversation themselves and they will ask you questions based on your life or based on what they see in you. That's wonderful. And I rejoice when that happens, but it doesn't always happen. Sometimes we need to go and be the one who initiates that conversation about the things of the kingdom, right? About spiritual matters. So don't be afraid. Jesus wasn't afraid to initiate those conversations. He wasn't afraid of people rejecting him. Those who had ears to hear would hear what he had to say. And so we want to be like Jesus, unafraid, bold in our witness, bold in our conversations, but also not abrasive or aggressive to the point where we push people away from us because we don't allow enough time for curiosity to grow within them, right? So there is a delicate balance there, but in the life of Jesus, if we look at Jesus in John chapter 4, when he talked with the Samaritan woman, we see that he begins a conversation with her. He says, "Will you give me a drink?" He actually expresses something that requires dependency on her to help him. And that's a great way to build relationships with people. We don't have to go as the one who has something to give. We can also go and receive what they have to give us and start with dependency on them. And then she begins to talk to him and says, "You are a Jew and I'm a Samaritan woman. Why are you asking me for a drink?" He had piqued her curiosity with his request. And then Jesus immediately goes to something spiritual and he says, "If you knew the gift of God and who it is that asks you for a drink, you would have asked him and he would have given you living water." So he drops these seeds of spiritual conversation, of curiosity, things that make her want to know more. He doesn't immediately say, "I'm the Messiah and you should receive me and I'm going to die on the cross for you." No, he doesn't go straight to what we sometimes call the gospel, but he talks about living water. He sparks conversation and interest in her, but he doesn't wait to know her for 3 months before he takes a risk that she might reject him. No, he goes straight to the conversation and he skillfully piques her curiosity. And then we know the rest of the story that happens there. So the first point I want to give you as we talk about this and answering this question is we need to, number one, be a publicly spiritual person. Be willing to be public in our spirituality. Now, I'm not saying that we should necessarily be public about our Christianity, right? Or public about what church we go to or what denomination, or I'm a Southern Baptist, or I'm a Pentecostal, or did you know that I'm a preacher, a Methodist preacher, an Episcopalian priest, whatever it is. Not necessarily public about our church or our church affiliations, but public in that we are a spiritual person, someone who has faith, someone who values their faith, someone who prays, someone who is compassionate towards the needs of others, someone who is spiritual, who talks to God and hears from God. And, these kinds of spirituality are something that people are seeking, even in the West, where people are rejecting Christianity in ways like we haven't seen in a very long time. They are not rejecting spirituality, and genuine spirituality is attractive and interesting to people. I just was on a coaching call the other day and I was talking to someone named Jonathan, and he was telling me about a gathering he had for a group of college kids, and they came over to his house and they had these God conversations. And there was a father of a Muslim young man who came along, and this father was listening in to the conversation, and he heard what Jonathan had to say, and Jonathan was friendly and kind, but also publicly spiritual about his faith in Jesus with this man. And at the end of the time, this man said, "What you're doing here is good. I want my son to continue to learn about your faith." Right? Because he was willing to be open and public. And the man saw something that he liked. Even though he was a devout Muslim, he did not reject that, and he didn't pull away because he was someone who had ears to hear. Now, maybe eventually this man also will want to learn more about Jonathan's faith. So we want to be open and public, but not offensive, not aggressive about our faith. We don't need to, go out on the street with our Bible and pound it over people's heads, right? But we do need to grow. And I think especially for those of you who are listening who are in the West, we are so hesitant about being public about our faith. And the assumption that people of other faiths will make when you never talk about your faith is that you don't have one or it's not very important to you, right? So we want to be public and let people know that you are someone of genuine faith. Now, finding a way to do that where it feels natural is a bit of an art form. I admit that, but we can learn and we can grow in this. We don't have to be so silent about our love for Jesus. We can be publicly spiritual and people of prayer. I remember there was a man named Cal Olson who worked in Bangladesh, and he was a missionary there, and he prayed publicly. He prayed often, and people saw that he was a man of prayer. And one of the leaders of that nation actually commented and said, Cal Olson is one of the most spiritual men I've ever seen. He was impressed by the depth of his spirituality and his love for his God, right? His love for God, his love for Jesus came shining forth in an inoffensive way, but in a public way, which then gave opportunity for these kinds of conversations. Or when there's a need, someone may come to you when there's a need in their life because they've seen that you are someone of spirituality. The second point I want to make is be willing to share your story with others, right? And we teach on the 3-minute testimony, how you can talk about that with the before I met Jesus, how I met Jesus, after I met Jesus, kind of simple way to share your story with others. Don't be afraid to share your story. It's your story. It's a story of your transformation by a God who loved you and died for you, and you gave your life to him, and you began to follow his ways, and he is in the process of changing you. Now, someone asked me recently, they said, I'm hesitant to do this before and after thing because I'm still in the process of being changed. I'm not perfect. That's totally all right. But you have been changed, right? You have been changed in some way by Jesus. So share that. And then also say, I'm not perfect. I'm still learning from Jesus. And he's still in that process of changing me. But I'm so glad I met him. I'm so glad that he's in my life, right? So don't be afraid to share your story. The next one is be willing to have God conversations. There are many kinds of topics we can bring up and ask questions and listen to other people's answers that spark spiritual conversation. Many, many different kinds of topics. What's the most important thing in your life? What do you think is the answer to our country's trouble today, right? What do you do when someone gossips about you? How do you forgive people that offend you? Ask these kinds of questions that spark conversation. Some people have a topic where they invite people over and they say, okay, we're going to have a discussion topic, a life questions topic today, and we're going to talk about this. And they listen to what other people are sharing. That's another great way to do it. The next thing I want to say is be a good listener and a good question asker, right? Learn to ask skillful questions, open-ended questions that encourage people to share. Learn to say, I'd love to hear more about that. Can you share a little bit more? And draw them out and draw them to share what's in their heart. If you notice that somebody is against Christianity, or they're obviously really resistant whenever you bring matters of faith up, ask them a curious question. Say, I notice that you kind of don't feel comfortable talking about these things. I would love to hear your story. What is it that makes you not like to talk about this? Would you mind sharing with me? I'd love to hear if you're willing to share that, right? So we can have these kinds of conversations with people to discover if they are spiritually open or just relationally open, right? And then take risks to find that out, right? They may reject you. They may get angry with you, but take a risk and have that conversation, and you're going to learn something from that. You'll learn that, yes, they're way more open than I thought. Right? When I was in California not too long ago, I shared the story of Joseph with somebody in my hotel, and I found out this young man was very open to talk about the things of God. I would not have known that if I never initiated that conversation. So you have to initiate something to discover and to gain this information, which is then going to tell you whether or not you want to invest more time in that relationship. Time is not equal. We only have 24 hours in the day. We are busy, busy people. we can't afford to invest all of our time in people who are not spiritually open, and we don't even know that, right? Now, if God calls you just to mow the grass for your neighbor every week for the next 5 years without ever sharing the gospel, or you shared and he rejected it and you're still supposed to mow his yard, then you, of course, listen to God. God knows how to reach people, right? But many times people are more open than we think, but we just haven't initiated that conversation yet. So you do want to invest more of your time in the people that are more open. So I hope this short talk about this has been helpful to you. If you have questions about this, feel free to write to me. You can write to me at admin@dmmsfrontiermissions.com, and I'd be happy to answer any questions you have. Or if I don't have time to write you back, I'll do another podcast that addresses that question. I really want to serve you guys as you dare to multiply disciples in your area. And if you would also do me a big favor, I would just appreciate it if you would share this podcast with someone else, and if you would comment and maybe even rate the podcast if you're watching it or listening to it. Rate the podcast and let other people know how you feel about it. Just an honest rating is all I'm asking for. And that will really, really help more people be able to have access to these resources. God bless you guys. Go out and make disciples. We'll be right back for a wrap up in just a moment.
Imagine a world where passionate followers of Jesus come together to multiply, transforming lives beyond imagination. Instead of toiling with little fruit, what if God's abundance flowed beyond your wildest dreams? Picture those you've invested in sharing Jesus freely, creating a ripple effect of disciple making. In her new book, The Multiplier's Mindset, Cynthia Anderson reveals how shifting mindsets can revolutionize disciple making. When Cynthia and her colleagues experienced these mindset shifts, they saw enormous results, including the launching of 19 multiplying movements in Africa and Asia, transforming tens of thousands of lives. This book will help you discover hidden harvesters, see church members move from passivity to passion, and release the power of simplicity in multiplying disciples. Don't remain stuck. Learn to move toward greater fruitfulness. Visit multipliersmindset.com and get your copy of The Multiplier's Mindset today.
Okay, a couple of quick points. Again, Jesus never took a long time to find out if people were spiritually open. He always quickly dropped a seed of a conversation, or he actually went to the kingdom rather quickly in his relationships with people. Some people are relationally open. Some people are spiritually open. Our job is to find out who is spiritually open so we can invest more and go further in conversation with them. Be a publicly spiritual person, right? Be a publicly spiritual person. If you are publicly spiritual, not necessarily denominational or Christian, but publicly spiritual, people will come to you when they have spiritual struggles or spiritual matters that they need help with. Be willing to share your story. Be willing to have God conversations. Ask good questions and be a good listener. And God is going to help you as you take risks in those relationships to find out whether or not they are someone that God is choosing and that he is at work in their life to draw them to himself, and he wants to use you. So be willing to take those risks. All right, so here's your assignment. Think about the relationships in your life, the people you know who are non-believers, and ask yourself the question, do I know if they are spiritually open? Do I know that? Have I really asked, or am I making assumptions based on how they look or their politics or other behavior in their life? Do I know if they are spiritually open or not? And if I don't, what will I do to find out, even this week? God bless you guys as you make disciples. We'll be back next week with another podcast. Until then, have a great week. That's all we've got for this episode of the Dare to Multiply podcast. One thing that would really help both us and other new potential listeners is for you to rate this show and leave a comment in iTunes, on Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you tune in to listen. Also, make sure to link up with us at dmmsfrontiermissions.com/blog on social media, and please just share this podcast with anyone you think might enjoy it. Until next time, remember, God's dreams for us are always bigger than we can imagine.